This month marks the 10th anniversary of my favourite game of all time, Bloodborne, and in lieu of any kind of an official announcement, I wanted to celebrate in my own way. Throughout the month, I'll be dropping several Bloodborne videos leading up to the game's anniversary, each one designed to celebrate one of the major pillars of what made Bloodborne so great, in my opinion at least. Last time we looked at Bloodborne's lone expansion, the Old Hunters, specifically its incredible first boss, Ludwig. In today's video, we'll be looking at another pillar of what makes Bloodborne a masterpiece. Its setting, the horrific, ghastly, and downright wonderfully twisted gothic city of Yharnam, and its depraved surrounding areas. In my opinion, perhaps the best realised world in all of gaming. We'll be ranking every single Bloodborne area from worst to best, including locations from the Old Hunters DLC. However, we won't be taking the actual area bosses into account today, but don't worry, that'll be coming soon enough. From the towering splendour of its once great churches and cathedrals to its winding, ruinous streets, maddened denizens muttering malevolently behind locked doors, to the labyrinthine forests encroaching upon the city walls, and the unsettling stone idols that litter every corner of the city, hinting at the sinister truth that lies beyond, Yharnam is a masterclass in immersion and world building, and today we're here to celebrate it 10 years later. In my opinion, Bloodborne doesn't have a single bad area. The game is consistent in achieving its vision, and that comes through in every inch of the level design and art direction. But that also meant that this was a pretty difficult list to make, so I'd love to hear your thoughts down in the comments. Which area in Bloodborne is your favourite, and do our thoughts and feelings align at all, or am I totally off base here? So, without further ado, it's Bloodborne's 10th anniversary and we are here to celebrate. So, let's dive in. This is my definitive ranking of every Bloodborne area from worst to best. And by the way, if you enjoyed today's video, then consider hitting subscribe down below. There will of course be more of this kind of video in the future to come, and it really does help out the channel more than you could possibly know. Your support is greatly appreciated and it makes an enormous difference, especially in our journey to our next major milestone of 15,000 subs. So your help is massively appreciated. But to be totally honest, if you're just here watching the video, that's already a huge help, so thanks very much for being here. So, like I said, there isn't a single bad area in Bloodborne, but something has to kickstart this list. Now, to be honest, it barely feels fair. This hardly feels like an area of its own at all. The abandoned old workshop offers up some intriguing lore implications, and makes for a very cool find when you stumble upon it, but there isn't much else to it ultimately. The abandoned old workshop is of course identical to the Hunter's Dream, the game's hub world, except this version is, well, abandoned. Cold and lifeless, embodied best of all by the inanimate doll slumped against the inner wall of the main workshop, this area has long been left behind by those who once inhabited it. It's fascinating, of course, and it feels like you are stepping into a long-lost memory. While the Hunter's Dream is technically disconnected from everything around it, the abandoned old workshop is very real, and very much a part of Yharnam itself. The lecture building is an interesting area in my opinion. I really like the overall theme. This was once a place of learning, but it has been completely consumed by the nightmare, utterly transforming all the students, lecturers, and scholars who were caught within. Again, there really isn't that much to the lecture building itself, it mostly just exists as a go-between for other areas, but it feels quite unique. There's something truly unsettling about entering one of the atriums and seeing these deformed, slug-like monsters, but still uniformed, some even still sitting perched behind their desks, retaining some element of their former selves. I also like the fact that you can leave the lecture building and head right out into the dark abyss of the cosmos beyond, being transported to the nightmare frontier, proving that this place really is utterly ensnared. Of course, Patches makes an appearance here too as well, which is pretty cool. So I know I said that there isn't a single bad area in Bloodborne, and that's true. But it's also true that not all areas in Bloodborne are created equally. There are some areas in the game that I always relish returning to, that I love to revisit on subsequent playthroughs and sift through again and again as though it were my first time playing. And then there are other areas that you either sprint through to the best of your ability, or just flat out avoid if you can. And well, considering Nightmare Frontier is an entirely optional area, you can indeed just avoid it, should you choose to. Look, Nightmare Frontier isn't bad by any means, and if you did decide not to revisit this optional area, I think you would be missing out inherently, but it is Bloodborne's version of the patented FromSoft Poison Swamp, and ultimately it's not a lot of fun to traverse. I appreciate the warped, nonsensical visual mess that is the level design itself, and the art direction is on point as always. We are truly in the throngs of eldritch madness now, with spiralling runes and gateways born out of the cliffside itself, lined with a sickly green innate glow, and the fact that several of the rocks and gravestones throughout are splitting open only to reveal bleeding, fleshy insides is truly disturbing, and it can't be easy translating Lovecraftian horror to a video game so effectively, but Bloodborne manages it pretty masterfully. However, in a game that consistently blows me away, even today, with its visual theming and art direction, this is probably my least favourite visual theme in the game. And while the discordant mess makes for a cool and stylised vista, I don't personally find it all that satisfying to explore. And really, any area that has the winter lanterns in it is always going to be a slightly begrudging revisit. Now, I had trouble deciding where to place this next entry. Yosefka's Clinic is where you begin the game after waking up from a less than sanitary blood transfusion, at which point you are left to your own devices. But of course, what's really cool about Yosefka's Clinic, though, is that for some players, those opening few minutes of the game might be their only point of interaction with this location. They'll just carry on and forget it even existed. But should you decide to return at any time, well, a story begins to unravel itself behind those now locked doors, and it takes on an unexpected significance. The Imposter Yosefka storyline is one of the best NPC quests in Bloodborne, and is both parts truly genius and genuinely horrifying, offering an up-close and personal look at the unholy acts taking place this night of the hunt, especially when you realise that your own actions may have wrought something utterly terrible. Another smaller location up next, but again one with real lore significance, is Bergenworth, the lost university hidden away within the treacherous depths of the Forbidden Woods. What Bergenworth lacks in gameplay and level design, really consisting of just a single building with a fairly basic layout at that, it absolutely makes up for in world building. By the time you stumble upon this haunting house of academia, if you've been paying attention, Bergenworth's reputation should precede it, and the area is a masterclass in that visual storytelling. As you make your way through the thickening woods, mist seeping between the trees, before you even know where you're headed, a monstrous fly-human hybrid abomination will attempt to jump you from the roadside, a startling depiction of the fate of the Bergenworth scholars and a tease for the truth that lies ahead. Because of course remember that prior to visiting Bergenworth, you aren't yet supposed to have quite grasped that what's really going on here is Lovecraftian cosmic horror, featuring aliens and all kinds of eldritch monsters. Up until this point, it's mostly just been a kind of gothic, vampire hunter-style beast-slaying game. But no, there is way more to it than that, lurking beneath the surface, and Bergenworth and the Moonside Lake are really the catalyst for that change. And so another tease that works really well is the appearance of the celestial centipede enemy, the fluorescent flower, the only one in the main game. In my opinion, this shows a remarkable level of restraint by the developers, and a commitment to the build-up and payoff that is Bergenworth and the reveal that lies beyond. Like I said, there isn't much to Byrgenwerth itself, and considering the build-up, considering the lore implications, that may be a little disappointing to some, and I totally understand that. But I like that Byrgenwerth itself serves as the wall between the game's two distinct halves. To expose the truth behind the veil, one must venture here at the ends of the earth and pull back the curtain. It's very fitting that beyond Byrgenwerth there is nothing but a lake, as if signifying that you have gone as far as you can go without knowing the actual truth. Moonside Lake, like some other boss areas in the game, gets its own lamp and title card, but to be honest, where these boss arenas are concerned, I'm mostly going to be just combining them with their associated areas, because they don't really offer a lot outside of the boss fight and the visuals on their own. And so while Moonside Lake gets its own lamp and title card, there is literally nothing to it aside from its glistening, watery arena, which is very pretty, very striking, and certainly impressed me back in the day. Though I think Elden Ring has since taken this concept and improved upon it with the Renala boss area. But considering it's a part of Byrgenwerth itself, I'm content to include it here. The Healing Church Workshop is forgettable, in my opinion. There's nothing inherently wrong with it at all, yet despite being connected to one of the very best areas in the game, I often forget the Healing Church Workshop even exists until it's time to actually go there. But what's weird about that is that the actual area itself is quite unique within the world of Bloodborne. It's made up almost entirely of an enormous spiralling tower that looms over the cathedral ward, granting you some incredible views of the surrounding cityscape, allowing you to peer into locations like Old Yharnam from afar. As you climb the tower, which is littered with enemies, most notably the wheelchair-bound, gun-toting old men, you eventually reach a locked door, one that can't be accessed until quite a bit later. But what's really cool about the Healing Church Workshop is that you can head downwards too, down into the deep, unsettling darkness far below. It's here that you have to engage in some trademark dodgy Souls platforming, and by the time you reach the bottom, you discover an interesting and twisted portion of the city. The beast-possessed soul who stands guard at the doorway is actually quite creepy, but this subsequent section of Yharnam has always intrigued me. I guess we can consider it to be part of the Healing Church Workshop area, even though it's really just the city streets once again, but things are markedly different here. Here, the citizens appear to have truly embraced the Night of the Hunt, donning these blood-stained butcher's masks and outfits and carrying crude weaponry like cleavers as they stalk the streets with their mangy dogs. I love the notion that the further down you go, beneath the rising towers, things have truly descended into chaos and madness. The final area in the base game is the Nightmare of Mensis, and I think this is a polarizing one. I really love the approach to this area, the way the gigantic, ornate, almost vampiric stronghold comes into view. An enormous jet-black gothic castle nestled amongst the furled rock formations really does give off the vibe that you've arrived. This is the final stop. Then comes the frenzy. Now again, I love how this looks. Upon arrival, you've no idea what's causing this strange, unearthly crimson light to bleed through the windows of this terrifying sanctum, as if attempting to ward you away, a vile beacon cutting through the fog of the cosmos itself. It's a fantastic visual, and very cool and thematically appropriate, but Frenzy is one of Bloodborne's more annoying mechanics to deal with, even if, to be fair, on the approach it's really quite manageable. And so if you can get around that, I do think it's truly atmospheric, and that visual is my favourite element of this area, and one of my favourite visuals in the game. The Nightmare of Mensis itself as an actual area isn't bad, but it feels a little bit played out, especially the further into the area you go. Despite this supposedly being the very ends of the world essentially, you've reached the absolute apex of the insanity that has Yharnam in its grip, Everything does feel kind of samey. The cobblestone streets are familiar, as are many of the enemies that walk them, albeit with some cool, ungodly twists. Dogs now bear the heads of crows, and vice versa, while gigantic pigs with a plethora of bulbous eyes bursting from their skulls are living proof that we are closing in on the epicenter of the madness itself. I'm not sure how I feel about the reuse of the shadows of Yharnam. Turning them into regular enemies feels like a bit of a cop-out, and the actual layer of the Nightmare of Mensis is a bit uninspired as well, featuring a mostly linear progression path with just a bunch of elevators to compensate for a lack of intrigue in the design itself. Overall, this area isn't bad at all. Like I said, it's quite a polarizing one, and there is much better to be had. The Forbidden Woods is perhaps the most notorious area in Bloodborne's base game. It marked a stark departure from the city streets, churches, and cathedrals that we'd come to enjoy by that point, instead taking players into a treacherous labyrinth of traps, swamps, and snakes. Lots and lots of snakes. The woods themselves do a great job of conveying how such a natural and verdant place can become so quietly corrupted and wicked, and it's absolutely thick with atmosphere like most of the game. The Forbidden Woods is also perhaps the single longest area in Bloodborne, and it can be easy as a result to get lost, frustrated, and dare I say it, even a little bored with the area after a while until of course you know the fastest routes through it. But I do appreciate the Forbidden Woods for trying to shake up the visual formula. However, as someone who adores the city aesthetic in Bloodborne and frankly would have embraced an entire game dressed up like that, this isn't my favourite place to explore. There are some great moments to be had here, however. The outlandish insanity of there being a cannon just parked up at the end of a settlement is a great wake-up call for those who might have begun to coast along. And of course, who could forget the incredible wraparound route that takes you from the Forbidden Woods and back into central Yharnam of all places, opening a gate that is visible to players immediately at the start of the game itself. I also enjoy the lead-in to the reveal of the first Snake Man. The way the game kind of highlights him upon entering this creepy decrepit barn, and you follow what appears to be a normal enemy down a flight of stairs, unknowingly walking into a trap as their true form is suddenly revealed. At roughly the midpoint of this list, we've got the Hunter's Dream, the game's hub world, and a place you'll become extremely familiar with and likely very fond of too. The Hunter's Dream is a beautiful, artistic place. The moon hangs low over this hazy dimension, drenching everything in an eerie, ghostly hue. The entire place has an ethereal feel to it, from the candlelit gravestones to the fields of shimmering flowers. The central workshop looms over everything, marking the focus point of the area. There isn't an awful lot to see here besides the gorgeous watercolour-like vibe, but of course the Hunter's Dream is home to several of the game's most iconic and beloved NPCs, from the wheelchair-bound German to of course the doll herself. The Hunter's Dream is designed to be a rare safe space in a game that's otherwise overbearing, brutal, and bloody, and it feels like coming home. That being said, Bloodborne's own limitations can make the Hunter's Dream feel like a frustrating middleman. Having to return to the dream every single time you want to visit a different area is definitely annoying and cumbersome, and feels like a relic of a time gone by for sure. Utilising the gravestones to access the rest of the game is also interesting. It feels like a continuation of Demon Souls' Archstone system, and really I think it's impossible not to love the Hunter's Dream, as disconnected from the main game as it may be. Of course it all comes together in the end, as the Hunter's Dream is also the surprise location of the game's several final bosses, and offers up a fittingly striking and painterly landscape to do battle on for the last time. As a game, Bloodborne is the master of atmosphere. The entire experience is positively dripping with it, and no area is quite as terrifying as the next entry on this list, Upper Cathedral Ward. Sequestered away in secret above the city closest to the cosmos, Upper Cathedral Ward is absolutely one of the coolest areas in the game visually. In a sense, it's what you've been heading towards for some time now, ever since stepping foot into the cathedral ward far below and first catching sight of the haunting combination of the astral clock tower towering overhead and the mysterious building perched to the left of it, light still pouring conspicuously from the windows as black smoke belches ominously from the chimneys. Something is still at work here. Well, this is it. Upper Cathedral Ward is a bleak place, the culmination of the choir's evil deeds, a terrible secret unearthed once you finally acquire the key to the area's only entrance. The environmental storytelling here is wonderfully grim. The area surrounding the orphanage is littered with slimy, slug-like celestial children, all of them gazing up at the clock tower's unearthly green face. The central building of the area is suddenly plunged into almost total darkness, with one of the game's best visual moments, when the lights suddenly shake and go out as the chandeliers crash to the ground and you realise that several enormous wolves were hanging from them all along and are now surrounding you. But while I think the visuals and atmosphere of Upper Cathedral Ward are fairly spectacular, there's no denying the actual area itself feels a bit lackluster. It's a little disappointing, but also quite annoying. There's a huge abundance of the brain suckers here, often hiding around corners, and they are some of the game's most frustrating enemies to deal with. Plus, again, while a cool visual, while a cool idea, the equally huge number of wolves in the area, and the main building essentially just being one big room flanked by two thin corridors, Upper Cathedral Ward is basically just asking you to funnel these enemies to a nearby doorway. It's not overly compelling, but it works. Now, I was reluctant to include the Hypogean jail on here. After all, it's just a section of another area that you're able to visit early. And when you visit the proper area later, you can still visit all of Hypogean jail, so is it really even its own area at all? Well, honestly, probably not, but I wanted to give it its dues for a couple of standout reasons. Firstly, Hypogean Jail has a unique soundtrack, and it is one of the very best in the entire game. Hail the Nightmare is Bloodborne's creepiest track, a frankly satanic chant that strikes right at the true nature of the horror at the centre of this game, and it is massively effective. It also provides the area with some of the game's best storytelling. The chant is actually being performed in real time, and you can hear it growing louder the closer you get to the unknowable source. But we know, of course, that the scholars of Mensis are preparing to effectively sacrifice the entire village in their godless ritual. Secondly, the way you access the jail early is perhaps the most surprising and unique in the game. After being grabbed by a snatcher in the cathedral ward, you are treated to a brief cutscene where your hunter finds themselves in the blood-soaked burlap sack of these hooded monsters, being carried into a jail cell before being left to escape. There's nothing else quite like it in the game, and it is awesome. The jail itself is genuinely haunting too, and gives you a brief tease at what's really going on behind the curtain. Remember, madmen toil surreptitiously in rituals to beckon the moon. What's going on here is explicitly being kept a secret due to its inherently wicked nature, and that is such a cool vibe. However, just eking out the Hypogean jail is, well, the actual area it's connected to. Yahargul, the unseen village, is again one of the absolute creepiest areas in Bloodborne, but it also represents the pulling back of the curtain in a big way. Yahargul only becomes accessible in full once the Blood Moon has been successfully summoned, signalling the true fall of Yharnam into genuine madness and revealing the truth of the city before it. As a thick, purple sky churns overhead, Yahargul is made up of much of the same scenery we've come to know. Ornate Gothic cathedrals, churches, towers, and more. Their spiked spires scraping the sky, only this time there's something even more dreadful occurring. Beneath the blood moon, enormous, alien spider-like creatures now cling to the buildings, observing the insanity unfolding below with an impassive gaze. You might have encountered the amygdala before, but if not, well, this is your introduction, and they make an incredible impact. But it's in the streets of Yahargul where you find the most tortured of souls. The village's inhabitants have been transformed into grotesque, fleshy creatures, amalgamations of blood and bone and sinew that now stalk the cobbles endlessly, remnants of those evil rituals still present in the village that was left behind to rot. Yahargul can feel very oppressive, but that is the point. This is perhaps the purest picture of Bloodborne's narrative rolled into one single area. A once great and proud city that has now fallen into the vice grip of hubris and greed, resulting in widespread pain and torment, all while under the ever-watchful eyes of something far beyond our control. Okay, so up next we have the first area found in the Old Hunters DLC, the Hunter's Nightmare. The Hunter's Nightmare is a fascinating place. As soon as you step out of what appears to be Cathedral Ward's main hub, you find yourself in a completely twisted and warped landscape, an accurate portrayal of the madness that's eating away at Yharnam's core. Of course, you're not technically in Yharnam itself anymore, you've been whisked to the place where all blood-drunk hunters end up, but still, seeing the famous iconography of Central Yharnam and Cathedral Ward mashed together in a horrific mess is pretty cool. The sun itself hangs in the background, though it appears splintered and broken, taking on the appearance of the Astral Clock Tower's sinister face in a fantastic visual. And it's also interesting in its own right. This is the only part of Bloodborne that exists exposed beneath the actual light of day. While exploring the initial section can feel a little overly familiar due to the recognisable towers, churches and cathedrals of the main game's first few areas, the Hunter's Nightmare transforms further and further as you descend deeper into the belly of the beast. A stream of blood carves a sickly path through the entire area like a vein, and it's patrolled by all manner of monstrosities, notably hulking eldritch warriors cloaked in a holy garb, and of course the Lost Hunters themselves, who make for some really fun and tense encounters. This area even has its own blood-starved beast, which is absolutely terrifying to suddenly come across when in the dark. The DLC's second area is the Research Hall, and it might just be the single most messed up area in all of Bloodborne. You know, writing out this list is really helping me realise that yes, this is a very dark game. Yharnam is home to nothing but terror, though that terror takes on many forms. The Research Hall is a sickening place, filled with the shrieks, screams, and moans of the victims of innumerable experiments conducted throughout the hall itself. The hall takes on a rather unique shape. The entire area is one huge, spiralling tower that leads ever upwards, with a massive staircase in the centre. While there are multiple floors, rooms and laboratories branching out from the staircase itself, climbing the staircase is your goal here. And the research hall's entire layout can be changed at the push of a lever, turning the stairs to another direction. A sickly emerald light permeates the entire hall, giving it a very alien feel as well. Again, the environmental storytelling is wonderfully constructed here. The patients themselves litter the now devastated hall, dressed only in the hall's uniform scrubs, their heads bound and wrapped within huge, blood-soaked bags. As you wander the various rooms, you might see victims still strapped to operating tables, or locked in place via some cruel contraption. The patients are all in various stages of transgression. Some look mostly normal as they can anyway, while others grope blindly at the floor with their spindly hands, searching for their lost eyes. Others have become almost slug-like, while some are feral, naked and wild. The most twisted of all are the patients who have become nothing more than a disembodied head, their bags enlarged and sloshing with brain juice. Plip, plop, splish, splash. Just missing out on the top 5, the DLC's final area is a haunting conclusion, not just to the old hunters, but to Bloodborne itself, at long last providing answers to the game's core mystery in a satisfying and of course horrifying manner. The fishing hamlet is unlike any other area in the game. Gone is the decadence and splendour of Yharnam even here in the Nightmare, or the ill-fated fusion of religion and research that decorates the city. At the end of it all is a quiet, humble little hamlet, a collection of numerous wooden huts and buildings stacked upon each other and lining the coast, gazing out into the endless unknown of the blackened ocean itself. The entire place is completely swamped and overrun with barnacles, seaweed and shells, while the inhabitants have long since lost their human forms, warped and remade into strange, watery, amphibious fish people of the sea, carrying their harpoons and dressed in rags. The dogs have become peculiar piranha-like hybrids, while mammoth shark men encircle the hamlet's central well. For you see, something washed ashore at the hamlet that would change the course of Yharnam's future forever. The hamlet is where the nightmare was born, where the hunters would transgress and trespass in their search for knowledge and insight, where they would doom everyone to an eternity of suffering. This is such a sad and lonesome place. While eerie, it never felt overwhelming and oppressing like much else in Bloodborne. Loss, betrayal, anger and devastation reverberate throughout the hamlet, but at the same time, these are people just trying to continue to go about their lives in the wake of their reckoning. Although the hamlet has long been almost entirely flooded and lost to time, it remains perhaps the most vital piece of the puzzle regarding the fate that has befallen Yharnam, and it connects all of the major players in some way. Plus, this area is perhaps the most overtly inspired by H.P. Lovecraft in the entire game, specifically the story The Shadow over Innsmouth, in which the protagonist discovers a horrifying eldritch race of aquatic fish people. And so we reach the top 5. And in 5th place, we've got maybe one of the more contentious picks in this video, being Hemwick Charnel Lane. There's always been something about Hemwick that has totally captivated me, and I think it's the uniquely witchy vibe of the area, which I guess makes sense. But it's true that there is a lingering sense of mystique hanging over the place, which exists just on the boundary of Yharnam itself, beyond a forest. Cackling old hags dance manically beneath the moonlight, brandishing meat cleavers, hot iron pokers, and all other manner of horrible industrial tools, while their slavering dogs stalk the grassy stone-laden pathways. In terms of the details, Hemwick is one of my favourite looking areas in the game by far. Decrepit towers are peppered throughout the lane, each one capped off by a spire that again looks like a witch's hat. In many of them, the lights are still on, and smoke drifts from the crooked chimneys. Decaying trees extend their branches like the legs of a spider, while pitch-black barns house the emaciated corpses of horses among the hay. Graves fill basically every single space throughout the lane. There is virtually nowhere that isn't occupied by a grave or a body or some other symbol of death. And of course it makes total sense that death would be found everywhere here. Charnel means to be associated with death, a charnel house, for example, which is a place where bodies or bones are deposited, and so that gives you a great insight into what Hemwick Charnel Lane actually is. It is a mass dumping ground for the dead of Yharnam itself. In my opinion, Hemwick Charnel Lane is the game's most successful venture outside of the city of Yharnam artistically. There's a wonderful sense of the sublime here too. This area oozes a gothic feel, perhaps even more so than the earlier areas in the game, as you find yourself teetering on the edge of an endless lake, Canehurst Castle visible across the water's surface. Meanwhile, screeching black birds encircle the witch's abode in a fantastic visual flourish. Plus, Hemwick's just a pretty breezy area. Overall, it's one of the easiest zones in the game, especially if you visit it before nightfall, and sometimes you're looking for that reprieve before heading back out into the real nightmare. Okay, and just missing out on the top 3, in 4th place we have one of Bloodborne's most well-kept secret areas, Forsaken Canehurst Castle, only accessible via the Canehurst summons found in Yosefka's clinic before waiting for the sinister carriage to collect you at the column found within the aforementioned Hemwick Charnel Lane. Canehurst Castle is a fascinating area, steeped in lore and blood-soaked history, now all but lost to time, and left to freeze in the desolate wastes surrounding it. The castle itself looks absolutely amazing, an imposing black brick creation, with ghostly white icicles hanging from every single ledge, like a million dangling daggers. There's nothing else like it in Bloodborne. Inside, the castle is a richly decorated Gothic delight. Glossy floors still being scrubbed by dedicated servants, dimly lit candelabras lining the halls, a beautiful central foyer, elongated dining tables covered in finery, and a vast library are all parts of the castle you'll visit, each one haunted by the shrieking banshees of the now murdered Vileblood nobles. And speaking of the Vilebloods, Canehurst Castle is notable for being really the focal point of the game's covenants, the covenant system taking a major backseat in Bloodborne to begin with. Despite having fallen into shadow, the castle still exudes a sense of its past luxury and snobbish elitism and tells a fantastic story. The snowy dressing helps to make the area feel very unique, and Canehurst Castle feels oddly closed off from the rest of the world. You know what, scratch what I said earlier about Hemwick Charnel Lane being the most successful artistic venture outside of Yharnam itself, Canehurst Castle deserves that prize. Again, much like Hemwick before it, this is also a fairly simple area too, and I really appreciate that there is an entire collection of brand new, never before seen enemies here, who also, as far as I can remember, never reappear throughout the remainder of the game either. Absolutely everything that takes place in Canehurst Castle, everything that occurs, feels distinct, with the only link to the outside world being the fanatical executioner Alfred, who you meet throughout the earlier portion of the game. Some of Bloodborne's best work is found in its optional areas, and the nobility of Canehurst Castle is a powerful remnant of Yharnam's bygone age, and helps to make this a truly compelling secret zone. Alright, so we've reached the top 3 areas in Bloodborne, and in 3rd place we have another optional area, Old Yharnam. I'm not sure what the consensus is on Old Yharnam, but for me this is a truly fascinating place, and one that tells a brilliantly effective story. Old Yharnam is a desolate, cursed place, a former district of the city that was one of the first areas to succumb to the beastly scourge. In the end, out of desperation, in an attempt to curtail the spread of the plague, Old Yharnam was put to the torch, setting the district ablaze and engulfing it in an inferno. The doors to the district were then sealed shut, and the rest of the Yharnamites were left only with the blood-curdling howls of surviving beasts still roaming the streets far below, long after that raging fire had finally died down. Old Yharnam itself is a ruined hellscape. Smoke billows from grates in the ground, crucified beasts litter the cobblestones atop burning pyres, and a lone hunter remained behind, watching over the area to ensure forevermore that nothing gets in or out. We've talked about the impact and importance of atmosphere before on this list, and Old Yharnam has it in spades. The enemies here have all descended into total beasthood, yet some retain a tiny portion of their humanity, hiding their forms beneath tattered shawls. Everything that takes place here takes place in the thickening dark. These creatures are deathly afraid of flame, and it only adds to the idea that you are descending into the den of the beast. Wolves with gleaming red eyes and salivating jaws prowl the streets, and their terrible shrieks can be heard from across the town. There's a brilliant sense of verticality to Old Yharnam too as you descend ever deeper, and it's in this verticality that the area tells its story. The uppermost layer of Old Yharnam still somewhat resembles Yharnam itself. The light of the setting sun still manages to catch the iron railings and ramparts. However, the deeper you descend, the more that light is snuffed out. As you reach the lowest level where the inferno began and consumed and ravaged the district to the fullest, the streets here feel truly dead. The buildings are charred and blackened, smoke and mist continue to trail along the ground, and the air is suffocated by an eerie silence. This is an area long abandoned to death and decay, and it feels almost hellish as you continue downwards towards the shadowy chapel that marks the end of your journey. Now, when it comes to the top two, as far as I'm concerned, they are almost equally as immaculate as the other. But something has to be in second place, and so I've chosen the incredible Cathedral Ward to be my runner-up. Cathedral Ward feels like the quintessential Bloodborne area to me, absolutely capturing the vibe and atmosphere of everything that I love about the game so much. Cathedral Ward is a beautiful, majestic yet haunting place, and feels like the epicenter of Yharnam's former greatness. Drenched in a grim, pale light, Cathedral Ward is centered around the immense Grand Cathedral, and the colossal staircase that leads up to it. The massive circular stone plaza at the foot of the stairs connects to several cramped and claustrophobic alleyways, which again look and feel so very Bloodborne to me. The thickening smog, the faintly flickering candlelit lanterns barely breaking through the mist, doors locked up tightly, and of course hulking beasts prowling the streets. I adore the theme of Cathedral Ward, the elevation of religion above all else, the foreboding nature of the Grand Cathedral, and beyond it, the astral clock tower peering down at everything before them, the maddened, transformed citizens carrying out the hunt beneath their godly foundations. Cathedral Ward, once the base of operations for the Healing Church itself, is draped in their iconography. Immense statues, incredible architecture, and swarming with church servants, wicked guards, and even bell-ringing giants. And of course, while the Hunter's Dream is technically the game's hub world, Cathedral Ward is really where it's all happening, and likely where you'll spend a big chunk of the game. This is where Bloodborne opens up. From Cathedral Ward, you can reach the following areas just by walking: Central Yharnam, Old Yharnam, Hemwick Charnel Lane, Forbidden Woods, Healing Church Workshop, Yahargul Unseen Village, and by extension, Upper Cathedral Ward and Forsaken Canehurst Castle. It's absolutely incredible stuff, And this is also where you'll meet the vast majority of the game's NPCs, and where a number of their quest lines either begin or revolve around. There's no doubt about it. Cathedral Ward truly is the core of Yharnam itself. But really, there could be only one winner. The greatest area in Bloodborne is of course Central Yharnam itself. Not only the greatest opening area of any Souls game, but perhaps the greatest opening level to any game ever made. Central Yharnam is an utter masterclass in game design, boasting an interwoven and multi-layered network with such richness and depth to it that it's easy to find yourself lost in exploring the spider's web of winding streets and alleys, discovering Yharnam itself for the first time and finding yourself in awe of its impeccable layout. Of course, Yharnam is the superstar here. The city is on full display right from the get-go, and although you are barely scratching the surface of the sinister secrets underscoring Bloodborne itself, Yharnam makes a mighty first impression. As the sun is setting low, casting a shadow across the cityscape, Central Yharnam tells a wonderful story. The city's denizens have gathered for the hunt, the hair-raising sound of an axe being dragged along the cobbles forever etched into my memory. While the citizens purge and burn, sacking the city and putting beasts to the torch in the middle of the high street in a monstrous fashion, stringing them up and watching in a cultish haze, there's so much more going on around every turn, so much to do and explore. The streets themselves are filled with the echoes of chaos, from overturned and abandoned carriages to coffins lining the pavement, bound and wrapped in thick chains. Residents have holed themselves up within their houses, but they too are descending into madness, cackling and shrieking at you from behind closed doors. Central Yharnam manages to do so much simply by showing and not telling. From the horrible screech of the cleric beast somewhere in the distance as you ascend a ladder early into the area, to the double doors being furiously battered by some enormous creature waiting on the other side, teasing you of the dangers that lie just ahead. And of course, there are sad, captivating stories abound here, from the kindly Gilbert, a fellow outsider who slowly succumbs to the beastly plague, to the heart-wrenching destruction of Father Gascoigne and his entire family, doomed to be torn apart by the night of the hunt, including, of course, the plight of his youngest daughter, who entrusts you with finding her mother, only to eventually venture out on her own, before meeting perhaps the most horrific end possible. Central Yharnam is executed masterfully from start to finish. There's just so much going on. The area features numerous layers, various shortcuts that completely transform how you approach the area and reward your exploration and courage, and even an entire subterranean sewer zone. Perhaps the single best sewer in any of these games that features a monstrous surprise deep within the pipes. There's possibly an argument to be made for Central Yharnam being the single best area in a Soulsborne game, but that's for another day. Regardless, this is a masterstroke, an utterly captivating way to begin a game. Bloodborne quickly understands that Yharnam is its trump card, its ultimate tool, and plays its hand right away, serving up a genuinely perfect example of how to craft a level, of how to put the emphasis on exploration and reward, all the while terrifying the player at every turn. It all feels so deliberate as a means of guiding a new player into this world, so efficiently laid out to maximise the impact of every set piece, from turning the corner to see a horde of citizens surrounding a pyre, to the reveal of the sewer pig from the shadows, to the wolves prowling the great bridge beneath the distant glow of the clock tower. There's no doubt in my mind that Central Yharnam is a perfectly crafted area. And in a game that, like I said at the start of the video, really has no bad areas. In a sea of mastery from start to finish, it manages to rise to the very top, to be the absolute best of Bloodborne. Alright guys, but that's it for the video. I really do hope you enjoyed it. That is my definitive ranking of every single area in Bloodborne, ranked from worst to best. Although, like I said, it is quite difficult to do, because there aren't really any bad areas in this game whatsoever. It feels a little unfair to rank the likes of the abandoned old workshop and the lecture building up against some of the greatest, most detailed and complex areas the game has to offer, but that's just how it is, I'm afraid. Let me know down in the comments below. Do you agree with my list at all, or do you think I'm completely off base here? What are some of your favourite areas in Bloodborne? And yes, what are some of your least favourite areas too? I'd love to know, so do please let me know down in the comments. Once again, thank you so very much for watching. I hope this video was of some value to you. Make sure to hit subscribe if you enjoyed it and you want to help support the channel, help get us to our next major milestone. I really would appreciate it. And I'm going to end this video before my voice completely disappears. So once again, thank you so very much for watching. Until next time, I'll catch you later, and let's talk games again.